Nuclear power is the best source of energy that we have accessible to us currently. Yet most people do not fully understand it, thinking it is exceedingly dangerous and risky. However, nuclear beats the competition in nearly every metric and is not nearly as dangerous as people think. Here is the infallible evidence to prove this statement true. The biggest problem with sources of energy in the modern era is their contribution to global warming as a result of them releasing titanic amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Within this metric, our sources of energy fall into two groups. The fossil fuels that pollute, coal, oil, and natural gas, and the renewable energies that don't, wind, solar, hydroelectric, and geothermal. Nuclear energy is interesting because it doesn't fit into either category, as it uses a natural resource but doesn't pollute. In terms of pollution, it does a better job at keeping CO2 levels down than all other sources, even renewables. Unlike fossil fuels, uranium is not burned, it is simply split, releasing energy without any CO2 emissions. Also, CO2 is not the only kind of pollution fossil fuels generate. Especially coal, but to a lesser extent the others, also spew out an array of wonderful substances such as sulfur dioxide, which causes acid rain, benzene, which is a carcinogen, and mercury, which will make you go insane and die. These pollutants indirectly kill hundreds of thousands of people every year. While renewables do not produce emissions, yes, biomass does, but let's be honest here, biomass is just renewable coal, so we won't count it here. They do produce CO2. This is because in order to build, let's say, some solar panels, you have to clear trees, which eat CO2. While yes, you could build them in the desert, nobody lives in the desert, and electricity faces losses when transported over long distances. As a result, renewables actually contribute more to pollution, albeit indirectly, than nuclear does when considering that renewables take up much more space than nuclear. Despite running on a consumable resource, nuclear power does not face the same resource shortages as the fossil fuels. Oil and natural gas are both predicted to be gone in 50 years, with coal slated to run out a century after that. Meanwhile, uranium is guaranteed to last 81 years by the very lowest estimates, but in reality will probably last many centuries due to improvements in use and extraction. Not to mention, there is also uranium in seawater, and, although somewhat expensive to obtain, would last most likely millions of years, or more practically, when humanity has either extincted itself or progressed technologically to the point where nuclear fission is obsolete. Uranium can also be obtained from the decommissioning of nuclear warheads or even repurposed nuclear waste. Not only that, but uranium isn't the only possible fuel for nuclear power, as there are alternatives such as thorium, extending the time frame even further. In summary, nuclear power is practically renewable for our purposes. Going into more detail with the space problems renewables face. Nuclear power plants take up about 1/50 of the land required to build a solar field and 1/300 of the land required to build a wind farm if one was trying to build power generation plants with roughly equal power production capacities. Not only does this mean that nuclear power is more carbon friendly, it also means that from a logistical perspective, it is much less burdensome. While it is true that fossil fuel stations have a similar space advantage to nuclear power, we have already established that pollution and limited supply puts them firmly in the category of energy sources that should be not used. Renewable energies also have the problem of being reliant on random events that cause their actual power yields to fluctuate. Wind is reliant on wind velocity, hydroelectric is reliant on water flow, looking at you, Hoover Dam, and solar is reliant on cloud cover and magnitude of sunlight. Also, some types of renewable energies can only be built in certain areas, with hydroelectric requiring rivers and geothermal requiring geothermal hotspots. In other words, parts of the Earth that are rather hot, nuclear power can be built anywhere and will not fluctuate in power generation, providing a constant output for years until they need to be refueled, which some high-tech reactors do not even need to shut down in order to do. However, there is still one big elephant in the room to cover: nuclear accidents. As a result of the materials they use, nuclear power plant malfunctions can be big problems, leaking radiation into the surrounding area. Yet, they are not as big of a problem as one might think. In the last few decades, governments have placed many regulations on nuclear power in order to prevent them, and it has largely worked. The two worst nuclear accidents, 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania and Chernobyl in Ukraine, happened before these regulations were in place. Meanwhile, the Fukushima accident in Japan in 2011 that almost caused a similar level disaster was largely averted due to swift and efficient government response and the high-quality construction of the power plant, most likely due to those aforementioned regulations that slowed and minimized the effects of the disaster. Fukushima had the potential of killing thousands as Chernobyl did, but in the end no lives were lost, proving that nuclear accidents, when responded to right, are not as big of a problem as they are made out to be. As for nuclear waste, we as a society are nearly at technological developments that will be able to permanently store it safely, so it will most likely cease to be a critical problem of nuclear energy in the future. So now that we have established that nuclear power is the best source of energy, it is up to governments and private companies to act, funding research on new technologies and building new reactors to meet up with the inevitable decline of fossil fuels and our ever-growing energy needs. If you are just a normal person, you can also help by sharing your knowledge about this subject with as many people as you can, because the nice thing about democracy is that, eventually, policymakers have to bend to the will of the public. Remember folks, latem est Dieu.